Now you have nothing." Rebecca's words echoed through the elegant office that once belonged to my father. Her face, usually composed for cameras and social events, was twisted with a mix of satisfaction and disdain as she threw the sale documents onto the mahogany desk. "Your father chose to give me control, Olivia. Accept it and move on with your life." I looked at this woman, my stepmother of only 3 years, and didn't recognize the person my father had chosen for his final years. At that moment, something inside me shattered and rebuilt itself at the same time. If she thought this was the end, she was gravely mistaken. This was just the beginning. My name is Olivia Kingsley. I'm 30 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was building a promising career as an architect in New York. Then, I received the call that changed everything. My father, Richard Kingsley, was sick. Very sick. I dropped everything. Projects, my apartment, a relationship that was already hanging by a thread, and returned to Boston. My father wasn't just my only close relative. He was Richard Kingsley, the visionary behind Kingsley Innovations, a sustainable technology company he built from the ground up. A man who turned personal tragedy into purpose after my mother's death, channeling his pain into creating technologies that could help save the planet. I arrived in Boston on a cold, autumn day. The mansion in Beacon Hill, where I grew up, felt strangely different, colder, more impersonal. Rebecca had redecorated everything since my last visit. Family photos replaced with abstract art. My father's office, once cozy and chaotic, now minimalistic and sterile. "He's in the master bedroom," Rebecca informed me, barely looking up from her phone as I walked in. "He's having a bad day." A bad day. As if my father had a passing flu, not a heart condition that was visibly deteriorating him week by week. When I stepped into the room and saw my father, the man who had once been so vibrant and unstoppable, connected to monitors, pale and visibly thinner, my legs nearly gave out, but I smiled because that was what he needed to see. "Olivia." He smiled, extending a trembling hand. "My brilliant architect came home." "Of course I did, Dad. I should have come back sooner." "Nonsense. You were building your life. That's what I always wanted for you." For the next 3 months, I split my time between caring for my father and trying to understand his condition. The doctors seemed baffled by the speed of his decline. "Progressive heart failure," they said, but couldn't pinpoint the exact cause. Rebecca was always present, always attentive whenever doctors or visitors appeared. She administered my father's medications with precision, including a natural supplement she insisted had been recommended by an alternative medicine specialist. "It's helping with the side effects of his medications," she explained. When I questioned it, her tone slightly defensive. "Your father trusts my research on this." There was something about the way she interacted with my father that always unsettled me, a certain detachment in her eyes, even when she smiled at him. But I ignored the feeling, chalking it up to my long-standing resistance to accepting that my father had remarried, especially to someone 23 years younger than him. One night I found my father alone, sitting on the balcony, gazing at the garden. He seemed more lucid than in the past few days. "Dad, you look better today." "Good days and bad days, sweetheart," he replied, squeezing my hand. "Sit with me. We need to talk." Something in his tone put me on alert. "Olivia, you need to know that not everything is as it seems. Trust the systems we built, not the people." His eyes, though tired, still held the intensity I knew so well. "Do you remember Pandora? The jewelry box you gave me when I was 10? I asked, confused by the sudden shift in conversation. "Yes. Sometimes we have to open Pandora's boxes to find the truth, even if it's painful." Before I could ask more, Rebecca appeared with his nighttime medication. My father's moment of clarity faded, and he returned to the lethargic state that had become his new normal. 2 weeks later, I found my father unconscious in his office. The ambulance arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Richard Kingsley, 65 years old, was pronounced dead from a heart attack. The man who had planned to revolutionize renewable energy storage was gone before he could accomplish his final, most ambitious dream. The funeral was surreal. As an architect, I had always understood the power of spaces and aesthetics, but what Rebecca had organized felt more like a meticulously choreographed social event than a farewell. Executives, politicians, and major names in the tech industry, all there to pay their respects, while I felt strangely out of place at my own father's funeral. During the ceremony, I noticed Marcus Chen, my childhood best friend and now Kingsley Innovations CTO, trying to approach me several times. But Rebecca was always nearby, redirecting guests, mediating conversations. When we finally managed to exchange a few words near the grave, Marcus looked tense. "Olivia, we need to talk. About the company, about your father, about—" "Marcus, there you are," Rebecca interrupted, materializing at our side. "The governor is leaving and specifically asked to say goodbye to you." When Marcus hesitated, she added in a lower tone, "It would be unwise to ignore a request from the governor, especially given the sensitive time the company is going through." With an apologetic glance at me, Marcus walked away. Rebecca then turned to me, her face a perfect mask of restrained grief. "Victoria Hayes wants to meet us tomorrow for the reading of the will," she informed me, referring to my father's longtime attorney. "At 10 a.m. in her office." That night, alone in my old room, I tried reaching out to Marcus, but all my messages received brief, evasive responses. It was as if something was preventing him from speaking openly. The next morning brought the first major surprise. In the elegant law office overlooking the public garden, Victoria Hayes, a woman I had known since childhood and who had always been warm toward me, seemed unable to maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds. Following the wishes of Richard Kingsley, "I will now proceed with the reading of his will and last testament," she began formally, opening an expensive folder. The reading started with minor provisions, donations to charities, keepsakes for old friends. Then came the pivotal moment. As for the main distribution of my assets, to my daughter, Olivia Kingsley, I leave the family estate in Beacon Hill and 15% of Kingsley Innovations shares. 15%? I froze in my chair. My father had always said that the company would be my legacy, even if I had chosen a different path. To my wife, Rebecca Kingsley, I leave 70% of Kingsley Innovations shares, granting her majority shareholder control, along with all other unspecified assets in this document. Rebecca maintained a solemnly appropriate expression, but I couldn't help but notice the glint of triumph in her eyes. Victoria continued, detailing how the remaining 15% would be distributed among longtime executives, including Marcus. When the reading ended, I stood up, still in shock. This doesn't make sense. My father always said I would inherit the company, regardless of my career. Victoria cleared her throat, uncomfortable. Richard changed his will approximately 2 months ago. Everything is legally in order, with 2 witnesses and a verification of mental capacity. 2 months ago? When he was already seriously ill? Your father was ill but legally competent, Olivia, Victoria replied, her tone slightly defensive. I verified it personally. Rebecca placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture meant to seem comforting, but it felt like the touch of a predator satisfied with its prey. Your father understood that you chose a different path, dear. Architecture in New York, far from the family business. He was being practical. I recoiled from her touch. My father never mixed love with practicality in business. Something is wrong. Victoria quickly gathered her documents. I'm sorry, Olivia, but the will is clear and legally binding. If you need time to process everything, I completely understand. I left that office feeling that something was deeply wrong, but I couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried multiple times to speak with Marcus, but he seemed to be deliberately avoiding me. The company headquarters, once a place where I had always been welcome, now had security guards who politely escorted me during brief visits. Then came the announcement that shook the tech world. Rebecca Kingsley had agreed to sell Kingsley Innovations to Gregory Palmer of Palmer Tech Industries for $440 million, a price that industry experts immediately pointed out was below market value, especially considering the company's pending patents. Gregory Palmer. The name sent a chill down my spine. He was my father's arch-rival, a man Richard had described as someone who would sell his own mother for a profitable quarter. The idea that my father's company, his most precious creation, would end up in Palmer's hands was unthinkable. That was when I confronted Rebecca in her office, my father's former office, and she finally showed her true colors. "Now you have nothing!" she screamed after I threatened to legally contest the sale. "Your father chose to give me control. Accept it and move on with your life." I left there in a state of shock and rage I had never experienced before. Instead of driving home, I found myself parking in front of Marcus's small apartment in Cambridge. I was tired of unanswered messages and evasive excuses. When he opened the door, his shock was evident. "Olivia, what are you— Get inside quickly." Once inside, Marcus checked the windows and lowered the blinds before turning to me. "I'm sorry for being so evasive. I'm being watched. Everyone at the company is." "What are you talking about? Watched by who?" "Rebecca put her own security team in place. They say it's corporate protection, but they're monitoring communications, overseeing sensitive projects." He hesitated. "Olivia, your father would never, ever have sold to Palmer. Never. So you also think something is wrong?" Marcus nodded, grimly. "Your father was working on something revolutionary in his final months. A new energy storage system that could make solar power viable on a global scale, even at night. He called it Project Aurora. Why didn't he tell me? Extreme security. Only a small group knew the full details." Marcus lowered his voice even further. "And there's something else. I started noticing changes in his behavior coinciding with the start of that supplement Rebecca was giving him." I felt my throat tighten. "You think she—" "I can't say anything without proof, but something isn't right. Your father was paranoid about digital security. If he suspected something, he would have left clues, protected evidence." Clues. Evidence. My father's words echoed back. "Trust the systems we built, not people. Do you remember Pandora?" "Marcus, I need your help, and we need someone who understands digital investigations." The next day, in a discreet cafe, far from our usual routes, we met Samuel Rodriguez, a former FBI cybercrime specialist, now a private investigator. At 45, with sharp eyes that seemed to read thoughts, Samuel listened to our story without interrupting. "So you believe your stepmother may have slowly poisoned your father, forged a will, and is now selling his company to his biggest rival. For below market value," he summarized, his voice void of judgment. "When you put it like that, it sounds crazy, doesn't it?" I replied, feeling the weight of the situation. "Actually, I've seen stranger things," Samuel responded calmly. "First step, we need to find any secure digital storage system your father might have used. Men like Richard Kingsley, especially. Those paranoid about security usually leave contingencies." That's when I started remembering my last conversations with my father. "Pandora," I murmured. He mentioned Pandora just before he died. "A box? A safe?" Samuel asked immediately, alert. "A jewelry box he gave me when I was 10. It was a kind of music box, intricately carved. He called it Pandora's box, a joke about my childhood curiosity. That very night, I searched my old room for the box, I found it at the bottom of a memory chest, dusty but intact. The tiny ballerina still spun to Fur Elise when opened. I examined every inch of it until I noticed something. The bottom seemed shallower inside than it appeared on the outside. Carefully pressing along the edges, as I had learned in my design classes, I heard a soft click. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing a small metal key with an embedded chip, a physical two-factor authentication. Exactly the kind of thing my father would love. "We have the key," I told Samuel over the phone. "But what lock does it open?" "That's just one component," he explained. "We need the second authentication factor and the location of the server or device it protects. Did your father leave any clues in his office?" "The office. Of course." The next night, with Marcus distracting security with a fake IT emergency, I slipped into my father's office. Rebecca had cleared out most of his personal belongings, but his massive bookshelf remained untouched, probably deemed irrelevant by her. Among the technical books and biographies of innovators, I spotted his old leather notebook, the one he always carried when I was a child. Flipping through its yellowed pages, I found recent notes, written in shakier handwriting than usual. Aurora progressing. Pandora contingency updated. Key 1, ballerina. Key 2, first horizon. 192, 180. It was a partial IP address, followed by cryptic notes that looked like codes or passwords. Horizon. The countryside house where we spent summers before Rebecca came into our lives. We called it Horizon because it sat on the edge of a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. The place where my father and I watched the sunrise after my mother died, searching for hope in a new day. I left the office with the notebook hidden, my heart pounding with renewed hope. Maybe, just maybe, my father had left a path to the truth. What I didn't know was that night would mark the beginning of a battle that would test not only my determination but also my very understanding of who my father truly was, and how much he had foreseen, even in the face of death. It was pouring rain as I drove to the country house on the Massachusetts coast, 2 hours from Boston. Horizon had been our refuge after my mother died, the place where my father and I had begun to rebuild our lives as a family of two. I hadn't visited the property in years. My father had practically abandoned the place after meeting Rebecca, who considered the house too rustic for her standards. Part of me feared he had sold the property without telling me, but as I turned onto the familiar dirt road, I felt an immediate wave of relief at the sight of the blue-gray wooden house still standing, bravely resisting time and the elements. I used the old key hidden beneath a specific rock, some habits never change, and stepped into the dusty house. The scent of sea air and aged wood triggered a flood of memories. Board games on rainy days, my father working on prototypes at the kitchen table, late-night discussions about how technology could solve the world's greatest problems. First horizon. I murmured, repeating the clue from the notebook as I wandered through the darkened rooms. What exactly did it mean? Instinctively, I climbed up to the small observatory on the 3rd floor, a glass-enclosed space my father had built specifically for us to watch the sunrise. It was our ritual, the first horizon of each day, witnessed together. The observatory was almost exactly as I remembered, except for one new addition, a reading chair I didn't recognize. Beside it, a small table with a lamp decorated with mathematical symbols, typical of my father's nerdy humor. I carefully examined the space, searching for anything out of the ordinary. That's when I noticed that the floor beneath the chair looked slightly different. I dragged the heavy furniture aside and found one of the wooden planks had a barely perceptible color variation. I pressed along its edges, and as I expected, it loosened, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a digital safe, no larger than a shoebox. On top, a USB port and 2 slots, one of them the exact shape of the key I had found in Pandora's box. "I found it," I whispered to the empty house, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I immediately called Samuel and Marcus, giving them the house's coordinates. They arrived 3 hours later, Marcus bringing his digital security equipment and Samuel carrying forensic analysis tools. Classic Richard Kingsley. Marcus commented upon seeing the safe. He loved redundant authentication systems. "We have the first key," I explained, showing the small device from the music box. But the notebook mentioned a second. First Horizon. "Maybe it's not a physical key," Samuel suggested, examining the safe. "This second slot looks like it's meant for a memory card or something similar." We spent the next few hours meticulously searching the observatory. Marcus inspected the electrical system, Samuel checked every floorboard, and I examined the few pieces of furniture. That's when I picked up the decorative lamp and realized something. The mathematical symbols weren't just decoration. They formed a specific equation, the same one my father had used to explain the phenomenon of light refraction to me when I was 12, during our first sunrise in that house. "It's a numerical sequence," I murmured. "We need to solve the equation." Marcus quickly ran the calculations. The result was an 8-digit sequence. 05231980, my mother's birth date. "This isn't a physical key," I concluded. "It's an access code." The safe had a small camouflaged numeric keypad on its side. I entered the numbers while Marcus connected the physical key. With a soft click, the safe unlocked. Inside was a miniature server, something straight out of a spy movie, along with a sealed envelope bearing my name. "Your father was a paranoid genius," Samuel remarked, clearly impressed. Marcus, hands trembling with excitement, connected the server to his laptop. "This is incredible. A fully air-gapped server, completely isolated with its own power source. No one could access it remotely." I opened the envelope as Marcus worked. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Olivia. If you're reading this, my suspicions have unfortunately been confirmed. The server contains what I call my digital will, not just instructions but evidence. I programmed it to continuously collect and store data, activating specific protocols if I failed to log into the system for 45 consecutive days. Do not trust Rebecca. Do not trust Victoria. I left false leads in my office and company computers in case anyone tried to find this server. Project Aurora is safeguarded elsewhere. The initial password for the server is "The Earth is flat." Our old code for ideas that seem absurd but hold hidden truths. Your father, who loves you always. Richard Kingsley. With trembling hands, I passed the letter to Samuel and stepped closer to Marcus's laptop. I entered the password, and the system came to life. On the screen, a simple interface appeared, divided into several folders. Evidence, recordings, Project Aurora, instructions, and messages for Olivia. I clicked on recordings first. The folder contained dozens of audio files, all dated and cataloged. Marcus selected one of the most recent ones, dated just 3 weeks before my father's death. Rebecca's voice filled the silence of the observatory. "I don't care what you have to do. We need him to sign those documents before he finds out. Yes, I'm increasing the dosage. No, the doctors don't suspect anything. They seem satisfied with the heart failure diagnosis. Yes, Palmer is aware. 50 million in my Cayman account. As agreed." It felt like I had been punched in the gut. Suspecting something was one thing. Hearing the confirmation was something else entirely. "He recorded her calls," Marcus murmured. "He probably installed some kind of system in the house." Samuel was already examining another file. "Here are the results of lab tests on that so-called supplement. It contains compounds that, in continuous doses, would cause exactly the symptoms your father exhibited, gradual cardiac deterioration that would seem natural." Each new discovery was like a dagger to the chest. My father hadn't just suspected he was being poisoned, He knew for sure and had been methodically gathering evidence. In the evidence folder, we found even more. Photos of Rebecca secretly meeting Gregory Palmer in hotels, intercepted emails discussing the sale of the company for a price far below market value, digitized copies of my father's real will with multiple time-stamped verifications and witness signatures. This is more than enough to overturn the sale and open a criminal case, Samuel declared, his professional tone barely concealing his outrage. Why didn't he report all of this while he was alive? I asked, the question hammering in my mind. Marcus, who had been examining the Project Aurora folder, looked up with a stunned expression. I think I know why. Olivia, you need to see this. The folder contained detailed technical specifications for a new energy storage technology. Even with my limited engineering knowledge, I could tell it was something groundbreaking. This is extraordinary, Marcus whispered. He did it. A storage system that could make solar energy viable 24 hours a day at a fraction of the current cost. This would literally change the world of renewable energy, and it would multiply the company's value tenfold at least, Samuel added. Finally, I opened the Messages for Olivia folder. There were several videos, organized by date. I clicked on the first one. My father appeared on the screen, visibly healthier than in his final days. It was dated approximately 6 months earlier. Olivia, my dear, if you're watching this, it means my suspicions about Rebecca have been confirmed, and I probably didn't escape in time. He sighed deeply and continued. I started noticing small discrepancies in my health exams about 8 months ago. At first, I attributed them to age and stress, but when Rebecca started insisting on this special supplement, my symptoms worsened drastically. That's when I started investigating. My father explained how he had discovered the connection between Rebecca and Gregory Palmer, how he had started discreetly collecting evidence, and how he had realized he was being slowly poisoned. The question you must be asking yourself is, why didn't I confront Rebecca? Why didn't I run or seek treatment? The answer lies in Project Aurora. This technology could transform access to clean energy worldwide, Olivia. I couldn't risk it falling into the wrong hands. Palmer doesn't want to develop it. He wants to bury it to protect his fossil fuel investments. Tears streamed down my face as I watched my father detail how he had devised an elaborate plan, pretending his condition was worse than it actually was, secretly taking antidotes to slow the effects of the poisoning, and building an irrefutable case, not just against Rebecca, but against the entire corporate corruption network involving Palmer. The real Project Aurora is hidden where no one would think to look. The coordinates are in an encrypted file on this server. Only you can access it, using your fingerprint. The video ended with my father looking directly into the camera, his eyes carrying a mix of determination and sadness. I'm sorry for keeping you in the dark, sweetheart. I know you're hurting, and I never wanted to cause that. But I needed to make sure the truth came out the right way, with undeniable proof. You've always been stronger than you think. I trust you'll do what's right. We sat in silence for several minutes after the video ended. The rain pattered against the observatory windows, as if the sky itself was mourning with us. Your father was an incredible man, Samuel finally said. He sacrificed himself to build an undeniable case, and to protect his technology, Marcus added. He knew exactly what was at stake. I wiped my tears away, feeling a steely resolve hardening inside me. We need to make copies of all this. Secure copies. We spent the next few hours copying all the files onto encrypted devices that Samuel had brought. We were so absorbed in our task that we almost didn't notice the sound of a car approaching on the gravel road. Marcus ran to the window. Shit. It's Rebecca's car, and she's not alone. Through the fogged-up glass, I saw Rebecca stepping out of a black SUV, accompanied by 2 intimidating-looking men. One of them was carrying what looked like a gun. How did she find us? I whispered, panicked. Your phone, Samuel answered immediately. She's probably tracking it. Quick, Marcus ordered. Finish the main copy. Samuel and I will distract them. No, I protested. It's too dangerous. We're surrounded by forest, and there's only one access road, Samuel explained calmly, checking his own weapon, something I hadn't known he carried. We can buy you some time. You finish here and go out the back. There's a trail leading to the next property, right? I nodded, remembering the path I used to take to visit the neighbors as a child. We'll meet at the cafe in Rockport in 2 hours, Marcus said, squeezing my shoulder. Don't worry, your father isn't the only one with a contingency plan. They rushed downstairs while I frantically finished copying the files. Outside, I heard raised voices, followed by the unmistakable sound of a heated argument. With the copies secured and the original server carefully placed back in its hiding spot, I grabbed my bag and headed toward the back staircase. I was halfway down to the first floor when I heard a loud crash, the front door being forced open. Tear everything apart, Rebecca's voice ordered, cold and sharp in a way I had never heard before. Find that server. I froze for a moment, terrified, then continued my silent descent. As I reached the back door, one of the men upstairs shouted, I found something. A hiding spot in the observatory. I didn't wait to hear more. I slipped out of the house and ran down the muddy trail between the trees, the rain lashing against my face as I clutched the device with the evidence against my chest. My father had risked everything, his health, his life, to expose the truth. I wouldn't fail him now. I reached the main road, soaked and breathless, but alive. A car passed by, and I managed to hitch a ride to the nearest town, where I took a taxi to Rockport. The entire time, my mind raced with revelations and questions. Why? Had Victoria Hayes, my father's trusted attorney, been involved in this fraud? How deep did the conspiracy between Rebecca and Palmer go? And most importantly, how would I use this evidence to honor my father's legacy? At the cafe in Rockport, I waited anxiously for almost 3 hours until Marcus finally arrived, alone, with a cut on his eyebrow. Samuel? I asked immediately. He's fine. Had to distract the goons while I got away. He's ex-FBI, remember? He knows how to take care of himself. Marcus sat down heavily. Rebecca is furious. They found the empty compartment. I managed to put the boards back before escaping. We need a plan, I said, gripping the drive with the evidence. Rebecca will try to close the deal as fast as possible now. We already have a plan, Marcus replied, a faint smile forming despite his exhaustion. I just got a message from Samuel. He reached out to a federal judge he knows. We have an emergency hearing tomorrow to present the evidence and block the sale. I sighed in relief, but something still nagged at me. And Victoria? Why would she betray my father after being his attorney for so many years? We'll find out tomorrow, Marcus said. Samuel is trying to track her down now. That night, staying at a small hotel in Rockport under fake names, we reviewed all the evidence again, preparing our presentation for the judge. As we worked, I received a call from an unknown number. Olivia? It was Victoria Hayes, her voice trembling slightly. Don't hang up, please. We need to talk. About how you forged my father's will? I shot back, anger boiling in my veins. It wasn't a choice. Her voice faltered. Rebecca found out about a mistake I made years ago, a case where I tampered with evidence to help a client. She threatened to expose me, destroy my career, everything I built. So you betrayed my father to save yourself, I accused bitterly. Yes, Victoria admitted, the defeat evident in her voice. And I've been paying for it with my conscience ever since. But I can help now. I have the original copies of the documents Rebecca made me prepare, with her notes. Proof that the will was forged. Why should I trust you now? Because I'm risking everything to make things right, she replied, her voice gaining strength. And because your father deserved better from me. We can meet tomorrow before the hearing. We agreed on a location, and when I hung up, Marcus was watching me skeptically. This could be a trap. Maybe, I agreed. But if she really has original documents proving the fraud, it will strengthen our case even more. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father in the video, calmly explaining how he was being poisoned while building his case. His courage was both inspiring and devastating. The next morning, Samuel met us at the hotel, looking tired, but determined. I got warrants for Rebecca and Palmer's bank records. There are suspicious transfers that match exactly with the dates your father documented. Our next step was meeting with Victoria. I chose a public place, the lobby of a busy hotel in Boston, on the way to the courthouse. Samuel insisted on arriving early to check the perimeter. When Victoria walked in, I was shocked by her appearance. The always impeccable attorney looked like she had aged 10 years, with dark circles under her eyes and a bandage on the side of her face. "What happened to you?" I asked as she sat at our table. "A domestic accident," she replied with a bitter smile. Rebecca wasn't happy when she found out I was considering clearing my conscience. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "Here's everything. The original draft of the forged will with Rebecca's notes, emails from her pressuring me, details on how the document was altered, and my full confession." Samuel quickly reviewed the documents, nodding in approval. "This tightens the net. With this and the server evidence, there's no way Rebecca can escape." Victoria looked like she was about to cry. "I'm so sorry, Olivia. Richard was more than just a client. He was my friend. What I did, it's unforgivable." I couldn't offer her the forgiveness she sought. Instead, I asked, "Why would Rebecca risk so much? Money?" Victoria shook her head. "It's not just the money, it's power. Gregory Palmer promised her a high-ranking position in his conglomerate after the acquisition, a platform far bigger than Kingsley Innovations." "And Project Aurora?" Marcus asked. "Palmer wants to bury it," Victoria confirmed. "He has massive investments in oil and gas. A revolutionary renewable energy storage technology would ruin his traditional business." As we prepared to leave for the courthouse, I noticed Victoria nervously glancing at the hotel entrance. "Is there anything else we need to know?" I pressed. She hesitated, then spoke in a low voice. "Rebecca knows you have the evidence. She's desperate. She's already tried to fast-track the sale closure for this afternoon before the hearing." My heart pounded. How could she do that? The contracts... "Palmer is bringing his entire legal team. They're going to try to push everything through before you can stop them." Victoria checked her watch anxiously. "The signing is scheduled for 2 p.m. at Kingsley's headquarters. We have until then." In the taxi on the way to the courthouse, Samuel made frantic calls to his judicial contact, explaining the urgency of the situation. We managed to get a schedule change. The judge would see us in an hour. As we approached the federal courthouse, a thought struck me. Wait, we can't just block the sale legally. We need to expose everything. The poisoning, the conspiracy, all of it. That would come later, during the criminal proceedings, Samuel explained. "No," I insisted. "My father didn't build this case just for personal justice. He wanted to protect Project Aurora, to expose Palmer's corruption. If we just quietly block the sale, Palmer can still try again, in another way." Marcus nodded slowly. "You're thinking of something public, something that can't be silenced." A plan started forming in my mind. Exactly. And I know exactly how to do it. We walked out of the courthouse with a temporary injunction blocking the sale of Kingsley Innovations. The judge, impressed by the preliminary evidence, had scheduled a full hearing for the following week. But I knew that a legal victory alone wouldn't be enough. "I need you to postpone the celebration party for the sale," I told Marcus as we made our way to the company headquarters. "What party?" he asked, confused. "The one Rebecca has undoubtedly planned for today," I replied. Knowing her, she's arranged something grand to show everyone how brilliantly successful the sale was. Victoria confirmed with a nod. A cocktail reception for the press and executives is scheduled for 5 p.m., right after the contract signing. Perfect, I said, my plan taking shape. We're not canceling anything, just adjusting the schedule. I explained my idea on the way. Instead of a prolonged legal battle that could be buried or manipulated, we'd do something more direct, a public confrontation during the party itself, with all the evidence displayed to those in attendance. Rebecca wanted a spectacle? I'd give her one she would never forget. Marcus hesitated. It's risky. Rebecca might sense something is wrong the moment she sees you. She won't see me until it's too late, I assured him. Besides, we need her confession. The evidence is strong, but a public admission would be irrefutable. Victoria added, a crucial detail. The party will be held in Kingsley's main hall with a multimedia presentation about the brilliant new strategic partnership. Perfect, I grinned. Marcus, can you hack that system? With my eyes closed, he replied with a confident smile. I know the security protocols. I designed them myself. Samuel remained pragmatic. We still need to safeguard the original evidence. If something goes wrong. It won't, I interrupted, with a confidence I didn't know I had until that moment. My father built this case meticulously. We'll honor him by seeing it through just as precisely. We split up to execute different parts of the plan. Victoria would return to the office, acting as if everything was normal while keeping us updated. Samuel would ensure copies of the evidence reached selected journalists and authorities in case our direct confrontation failed. And Marcus would prepare our technological surprise. I spent the afternoon in a nearby hotel, reviewing every file and recording, preparing what I would say. By 4 p.m., I received confirmation. The party was still scheduled for 5 p.m., with the final contract signing set as a ceremonial event during the reception. Rebecca is confident, Victoria messaged. The court order hasn't been delivered yet, and she believes she can finalize the sale before it happens. Perfect. The more confident she was, the harder her fall would be. At 4:30 p.m., I was already in position inside a control room adjacent to the main hall, connected to the communication system via a tablet Marcus had set up. Through the security cameras, I watched as the guests arrived. Executives, journalists, local politicians, all elegantly dressed, champagne glasses in hand, professional smiles on their faces. Rebecca moved through the room in a stunning red dress, the picture of a triumphant CEO celebrating a corporate victory. Gregory Palmer arrived shortly after, flanked by a team of lawyers. Even from a distance, I could sense his arrogance. We're ready, Marcus announced, finishing the final connections. At the right moment, we'll have full control of the audiovisual system. Samuel entered the room, now dressed as one of the event's security personnel. The police officers are positioned discreetly. The moment we give the signal, they'll move in. I took a deep breath. Let's begin. The next moments felt like they were happening in slow motion. Rebecca stepped onto the small stage, beaming at the audience. Palmer joined her, carrying an elegant gold pen for the ceremonial signing. Ladies and gentlemen, Rebecca began, her voice amplified through the sound system. Today, we celebrate not just a business transition, but the dawn of a new era. For the technology that Richard Kingsley so brilliantly pioneered. I watched her flawless performance with a mix of anger and morbid fascination. How could she say my father's name so naturally after poisoning him so slowly? Now, I whispered to Marcus, who pressed a sequence of keys. The hall's lights flickered momentarily. When they stabilized, the massive screen behind Rebecca no longer displayed the Palmer Tech logo. Instead, it showed an image of my father, In his office, a still frame from his digital will video. Rebecca froze, confusion flickering across her face. The crowd murmured, equally perplexed. "What is this?" Palmer demanded, turning to his technical team. Before anyone could respond, my father's voice filled the hall. "My name is Richard Kingsley, and if you are watching this video, I have been murdered by my wife, Rebecca Kingsley, in conspiracy with Gregory Palmer." The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye was fixed on the screen, then on Rebecca, who had visibly paled. "There must be some technical issue," she attempted, forcing a nervous laugh. "Let's take a brief pause while there will be—" "No pause, Rebecca," I announced, stepping into the hall through the side door. The shock on her face when she saw me was almost satisfying. Gregory Palmer was already discreetly backing toward the exit, but Samuel and two plainclothes officers blocked his path. "Olivia," Rebecca quickly regained her composure. "This is completely inappropriate. I know you're grieving, but interrupting a corporate event with baseless accusations—" "Baseless?" I interrupted, stepping closer to the stage. "Marcus, please, show them what's actually based on facts." The screen behind her changed, now displaying a mosaic of evidence. Lab results of the poisoned supplement, bank transfers from Palmer to offshore accounts linked to Rebecca, the forged will side by side with the original. "What you're seeing," I explained to the stunned audience and the journalists who were already snapping frantic photos, "are the meticulously gathered pieces of evidence my father collected before his death. He knew he was being poisoned, he knew his will had been forged, and he knew that the sale of his company to Palmer was part of a conspiracy to bury his most revolutionary technology." Reporters surged forward, cameras and microphones aimed at me, Rebecca, and Palmer. The court order blocking the sale was handed over at that very moment by a court officer, another part of our plan. "This is ridiculous," Palmer barked, recovering from the initial shock. "Complex corporate transactions always seem suspicious to outsiders. This young woman is clearly distraught over her father's passing." "I'm a distraught young woman with access to all your secret communications," I replied calmly. The screen changed again, now showing emails between Palmer and Rebecca. Like this one from 6 months ago, where you discuss how to eliminate Richard from the picture and ensure Project Aurora never sees the light of day. Palmer went pale. Rebecca, realizing the situation was spiraling fast, tried a new approach. "Olivia, clearly there has been some misunderstanding. Why don't we talk in private? I'm sure we can reach an agreement that—" "An agreement?" I repeated, now stepping onto the stage to face her directly. "Like the one you made with my father's rival to slowly kill him and sell his company for a fraction of its value?" Rebecca looked around, realizing she was surrounded, both figuratively and literally, with uniformed officers now visible at the hall's entrances. Her mask began to crack. "You don't understand," she hissed, dropping the social smile. "Your father was a foolish idealist, all that talk about saving the planet when he could have been 10 times a billionaire. His vision was limited." "Keep going, Rebecca," I encouraged, feeling we were reaching the breaking point. "Tell everyone why." "My father's vision was so terrible. Project Aurora would have made solar energy cheap and accessible worldwide," she spat, as if the words themselves were poison. "Do you know what that would have done to the energy market? To companies like Palmer's? Trillions in market value. Would have vanished. Richard could have sold the technology to the oil giants to bury it, but no, he wanted to share it with the world." Every word she spoke was being recorded by dozens of devices. The reporters were in a frenzy, broadcasting live. "So you decided he had to die," I stated, keeping my voice steady despite the pain I felt. "So you could sell the company and the technology to Palmer to have it buried." He left me no choice. Rebecca practically screamed, all pretense of decorum abandoned. I tried for months to convince him to be reasonable. I offered him everything, luxury, vacations, anything he wanted. But all he cared about was his precious legacy and you. That last part caught me off guard. Me? It was always, Olivia would want us to do the right thing? I'm building this for Olivia's future, she mocked my father with disdain. You weren't even here. You abandoned him to build your stupid buildings in New York. The pain in my chest was almost physical, but I held firm. And then you started poisoning him. A deadly silence fell over the hall. Rebecca realized, too, late what she had done, confessed not just to corporate conspiracy but to murder in front of dozens of witnesses. That's not what I meant, she stammered, looking around frantically. Gregory Palmer, always the survivor, was already trying to distance himself. I never authorized any of this. If Rebecca poisoned her husband, she acted on her own. Rebecca turned to him, betrayed. You son of a bitch, it was your idea. Accidents happen in families, you said. You promised no one would ever find out. That was all we needed. The officers moved in, cuffing both Rebecca and Palmer as they read them their rights. The scene erupted into chaos. Journalists broadcasting live, horrified executives stepping back as if mere proximity could taint them. Victoria Hayes approached me on stage, discreetly handing me a folder. The original documents as promised. Thank you, I replied, watching as Rebecca was led away. Our eyes met briefly, hers filled with hatred, mine not with triumph, but with an odd sense of peace. The following hours passed in a blur of police statements, press conferences, and calls from company executives desperate to ensure they still had jobs. Samuel coordinated the security of the evidence, making sure copies were in the right hands. Victoria voluntarily came forward to testify about her role in the forgery. By the time I finally had a moment of peace, it was already past midnight. Marcus found me in my father's old office, now partially emptied by Rebecca's team. We did it, he said simply, sitting beside me. Your father would be proud. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. After a moment of comfortable silence, I asked, Now what? Now you have a company to rebuild, he replied, and a revolutionary project to develop. I'm an architect, not a CEO, I argued weakly. Marcus smiled. Your father wouldn't have entrusted this to you if he didn't. Believe you could do it. Besides, you're not alone. I looked at my father's portrait on the wall, the only item Rebecca hadn't removed, likely to keep up appearances. There's still one thing we need to figure out, I reminded him. The real Project Aurora. My father said it was hidden, where no one would think to look. 6 months passed. Kingsley Innovations didn't just survive, it thrived under my unexpected leadership. Rebecca and Palmer's trial was underway, with evidence so overwhelming that their own lawyers had suggested plea deals. Victoria was serving community service as part of a cooperation agreement. As for Project Aurora, we found its exact coordinates that very night, in an encrypted file that could only be unlocked with my fingerprint. The coordinates led us to a surprise. A secret laboratory in the mountains, fully operational and staffed by a small, loyal team of scientists who had continued my father's work in total secrecy. Not only were the prototypes there, but also improved versions they had developed in the months since his death. Your father told us to wait until you found us, explained Dr. Chen, the team's leader. He was absolutely certain you would come. The technology was everything my father had promised and more. Not only would it revolutionize solar energy storage, but it had applications we hadn't even imagined at first. In just 6 months, we were already in advanced testing phases, with global licensing plans ensuring widespread access to the technology. On the 1-year anniversary of my father's death, I made a private pilgrimage to his grave. Marcus accompanied me, as he had during so many important moments that year. Our friendship had evolved into something deeper, though we were both too busy to put a label on it. I placed the restored Pandora's box on the marble headstone, a symbol of how the truth, no matter how painful, had brought justice and a new beginning. "You know what still amazes me?" I said to Marcus as we walked away slowly. "How my father planned all of this. Not just the evidence, but me. As if he knew I would eventually take over the company, even when I had no idea myself." Marcus smiled. "He always said you had the same innovative spirit as him, just applied to different structures. She builds buildings, I build technology, but we're both building the future," he told me once. That afternoon, I found one last video I hadn't noticed before in the Backo, Messages for Olivia folder of his digital will. It was shorter than the others, dated just a week before my father's death. "Olivia," he began, looking frailer than in previous videos, but with a determined spark in his eyes. "There's something I need to tell you, something I never had the courage to say in life. I always respected your desire to follow your own path, away from the spotlight of Kingsley. But secretly, I built all of this with you in mind." He paused, adjusting himself in the chair. "Project Aurora isn't just about clean energy. It's about giving future generations the freedom that our dependence on fossil fuels has taken from us. It's about putting control back in people's hands, about how they power their lives. And who better to lead that than someone who understands how spaces and structures shape our world?" Tears streamed down my face as he continued. "I know you may have never planned to return to Kingsley, but if you're watching this, it means you found your way back despite everything. I trust that you'll find purpose here, just as I did after losing your mother." His face softened into a smile. "And if, after all this, you decide this isn't your path, that's okay too. The choice will always be yours. I just want you to know that no matter what happens to the company, the technology, or even me, you, Olivia, have always been my greatest and most precious legacy." The screen faded to black, but I sat there for a long time, absorbing his words. I finally understood that my father's true legacy wasn't the company, or the legal documents, or even the groundbreaking technology. It was the truth. The chance to choose my own path with open eyes. The opportunity to turn tragedy into purpose, just as he had. The next day, I announced the official launch of Project Aurora to the world, unveiling a public demonstration of the technology my father had protected with his own life. As I watched, hundreds of tiny lights flicker on in the demonstration field, powered by the storage system that continued supplying energy hours after sunset. I remembered what Rebecca had said during our final confrontation. He only cared about his precious legacy and you. She was right in a way. But what she never understood was that to my father, they were one and the same.